There are moments in a man's life that define everything that comes after. Not the big wins, not the celebrations, the humiliations, the moments when someone with a clipboard and a dealership polo looks at what you're offering and decides publicly that it's worthless, that you're worthless. For Jake Hollister, that moment happened on a Tuesday morning in March 2011 in the used equipment lot behind Redstone Massey Ferguson in Lexington, Nebraska. He was 26 years old. He had 340 acres of leased pasture for his cattle operation, and he had his grandfather's 1978 Massey Ferguson 1085, a tractor that had been in his family since it rolled off the lot with 11 hours on the clock. The paint was faded, the cab glass had a crack, the hydraulics leaked when it sat overnight, but the engine fired every single time. The transmission was solid, and it had pulled more hay wagons, feed mixers, and post-hole diggers than most men would see in a lifetime. Jake needed something newer, something with a cab that sealed, something that didn't require a space heater and 3 jackets to run in January. So he loaded the 1085 onto a trailer, drove it 40 minutes to Redstone, and asked if they'd take it on trade toward a used 5400 series they had listed for $38,000. He never made it to the finance office. The used equipment manager, a man named Carl Ventura who'd been at that dealership for 19 years, walked around the 1085 with his arms crossed. He didn't even climb into the cab. He looked at the hour meter, looked at the tires, looked at the faded decals. Then he looked at Jake. "We don't take scrap metal on trade," Carl said. Loud enough for 2 shop techs to hear, loud enough for another customer browsing a 7600 series to turn his head. Jake felt his face go hot. "It's not scrap," he said. "It runs. It works. My grandfather bought it new." Carl shrugged. "I don't care if your great-grandfather blessed it in a church. It's a 40-year-old tractor with no market value. If you want to trade something, bring me something I can actually sell. Otherwise, you're wasting my time." He turned and walked back toward the building. Jake stood there in the gravel lot, alone, next to a machine that represented his entire family's farming history. One of the shop techs avoided eye contact. The other customer, a guy Jake recognized from the feed co-op, pretended he hadn't heard anything. But he had. They all had. Jake loaded the 1085 back onto the trailer. He didn't say a word. He drove home, backed the tractor into the shed, and sat in his truck for 20 minutes staring at the steering wheel. His phone rang twice. He didn't answer. He just sat there, replaying Carl's words. Scrap metal, no market value, wasting my time. Then he made a decision. He would never walk into Redstone Massey Ferguson again. And one day, he didn't know when, but one day Carl Ventura would remember this moment and regret it. What Jake didn't know that day was how long 8 years really is. How much can change. How much a man can build when humiliation becomes the only fuel he's willing to burn. But first, he had to survive. Jake's operation in 2011 wasn't impressive. 340 leased acres, 60 head of cattle, the 1085, a 1990s Ford pickup with 198,000 miles. He was renting the land from a retired farmer named Eugene Braswell, who liked Jake's work ethic but didn't like risk. The lease was year to year, no long-term security, no ability to make real infrastructure investments. But Jake wasn't in a position to buy land. Not at $4,200 an acre, not with a credit score still recovering from a bad equipment loan he'd co-signed for a cousin 3 years earlier. So he did what young operators do when they have no leverage. He worked. He took a part-time job at a feedlot 15 miles north, running night shifts. He sold hay to horse owners. He fixed neighbors' equipment in his shed for cash, and he kept the 1085 running. He couldn't afford to replace it. So he learned every bolt, every gasket, every relay on that tractor. He found a parts supplier in Iowa who sold OEM Massey Ferguson components at cost. He learned how to rebuild hydraulic cylinders. He taught himself electrical diagnostics using a $40 multimeter and a forum full of retired mechanics. The 1085 became more than a tool, it became proof. Proof that Carl Ventura was wrong. Proof that a man who knew his equipment could outwork someone who just knew how to swipe a credit card. By 2013, Jake had saved enough to buy his first piece of land. 80 acres, marginal soil, a banknote that made his accountant wince. But it was his. He ran cattle on it. He cut hay. He kept his head down. In 2015, Eugene Braswell passed away. His family decided to sell the 340 acres Jake had been leasing. Jake couldn't afford it, but he also couldn't afford to lose it. He went to 3 banks. 2 said no. The third, a small regional bank in Kearney, said yes, but only because Jake's cattle operation had been profitable for 4 straight years and his equipment maintenance records were obsessively detailed. The loan officer, a woman named Patricia Gomes, told him something he wouldn't forget. "You take care of your stuff," she said. "That matters more than people think. Most guys your age are rolling payments on equipment they can't maintain. You're different." Jake bought the 340 acres. Now he had 420 acres, owned. He added a second tractor, a used Massey Ferguson 4200 series he found at an auction in South Dakota. It wasn't flashy, but it was reliable, and it wasn't purchased from Redstone. By 2016, Jake was running 115 head of cattle, cutting 300 acres of hay annually, and custom baling for 5 neighbors. He bought another 160 acres in 2017, then 200 more in early 2018, 780 acres total. He added a Massey Ferguson 5700 series from a dealership in Kansas, then a 6700 series from a private sale in Iowa. He never stepped foot in Redstone Massey Ferguson. Not once. Even when it was the closest dealership, even when it would have saved him 2 hours of driving. He drove past it on Highway 30 at least twice a month, and every single time he thought about Carl Ventura. Every single time he remembered standing in that gravel lot, humiliated, while other men pretended not to notice. By the summer of 2018, Jake Hollister owned 6 Massey Ferguson tractors. The Tezen 85 still ran, still worked, still sat in the shed waiting. He could have sold it a dozen times, could have traded it in for something newer, but he didn't, because it wasn't about the tractor anymore. It was about the principle. Jake's operation was no longer small. 780 acres, 140 head of cattle, 6 tractors, a payroll of 2 full-time employees and 3 seasonal workers. His custom baling business had become a significant revenue stream. He was baling for 12 operations across 3 counties. And because Jake maintained his equipment like a man who'd been humiliated in a dealer lot, his uptime was near perfect. He had 0 unplanned downtime during the 2018 hay season. 0. That reputation mattered. Farmers started calling him not because he was the cheapest, but because he was the most reliable. One operator, a 4th-generation dairy farmer named Ron Epstein, told Jake something over coffee at a diner in Cozad. "I've used 5 custom balers in the past 10 years. Ron said. "You're the first one who's never missed a day. That's worth more than a discount." Jake nodded. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew why his uptime was perfect, because he'd learned to fix things when no one thought they were worth fixing. In November 2018, Jake was approached by a farm management company about leasing another 1,100 acres of pivot-irrigated ground. The lease terms were aggressive, but the potential was massive. If Jake took it, he'd be operating nearly 1,900 acres. He'd need more equipment, bigger equipment. He started shopping. He looked at a Massey Ferguson 7700 series at a dealership in Lincoln. Clean machine, low hours, good price. He called them, set up a time to come look at it. The salesman was professional, respectful, gave him space to inspect the tractor, run the loader, test the hydraulics. Jake liked the machine. But when he mentioned he might want to trade in one of his older units, the salesman hesitated. "We can take a look," he said. "What are you thinking?" "I've got a 78 1085, Jake said. "Runs strong, clean maintenance records." The salesman's face changed slightly. "An 85? That's pretty old. I'm not sure we'd have much market for it. Let me talk to our used equipment guy." There it was again, that tone, that look. The same instinct to dismiss something based on age rather than condition. Jake didn't even wait for the answer. He thanked the salesman, got in his truck, and left. He bought the 7700 series from a private seller in Kansas 2 weeks later, paid cash, drove it home himself, and the 1085 stayed in the shed, untouched, untraded, a monument to a grudge that hadn't softened in 7 years. In December 2018, Redstone Massey Ferguson's sales numbers hit a 10-year low. Corn prices were down, soybean margins were brutal, dairy operations were bleeding, and farmers weren't buying iron. The dealership's new owner, a regional ag equipment group that had purchased Redstone in 2016, was putting pressure on the management team. Carl Ventura, the used equipment manager, was told to move inventory. Fast. They started cutting prices, offering aggressive financing, running radio ads. It didn't matter. Farmers in the region were either broke or extremely cautious. Except one. Jake Hollister wasn't cautious. By early 2019, he'd signed the lease for the 1,100 acres. His operation now covered 1,880 acres. He'd bought 2 more Massey Ferguson tractors, a 6400 series and another 5700 series, from dealerships in Iowa and South Dakota. His fleet was now 8 tractors deep, all Massey Ferguson. 0 purchased from Redstone. In March 2019, Jake was bailing for a farmer named Dennis Kowalski, about 12 miles south of Lexington. Dennis mentioned he'd just been to Redstone to look at a planter. "They're hurting," Dennis said. "Salesmen told me they're having their worst year in a decade. Corporates breathing down their necks." Jake didn't respond immediately. He just guided the baler through another windrow, watching the knotters work. Then he asked, "Carl Ventura still working there?" Dennis nodded. "Yeah, why?" Jake shook his head. "Just curious." But that night, he sat at his kitchen table and did some math. He'd spent $340,000 on Massey Ferguson equipment in the past 3 years. $340,000 that could have gone to Redstone. That could have been their revenue, their commission, their justification to corporate that the market was still viable. Instead, he'd driven to Kansas, Iowa, South Dakota, and Colorado. He'd paid other dealerships because of one man's words on one Tuesday morning 8 years ago. Jake opened his laptop, he pulled up Redstone's website, he clicked on Contact Us, and he sent an email. The email was 3 sentences long. "I operate 1,880 acres near Cozad. I run 8 Massey Ferguson tractors. I'm looking to add 2 more units and possibly upgrade my hay equipment. I'd like to schedule a time to discuss options." He signed it. Jake Hollister. He didn't mention the 1085. He didn't mention Carl Ventura. He just hit send and waited. The response came 14 hours later from the dealership's sales manager, a man named Todd Brinley. "Mr. Hollister, thank you for reaching out. We'd be happy to discuss equipment options with you. When would be a good time to meet? We can come to your operation if that's more convenient." Jake read it twice. "We can come to your operation." 8 years ago, he'd been told his tractor was scrap metal. Now they wanted to come to him, he replied. "I'll come to you. Thursday, 10 a.m. Thursday morning, Jake pulled into Redstone Massey Ferguson's lot in his 2018 Chevy 2500. Clean truck, no rust, no dents. He parked near the front entrance, right next to a new 8S Series display tractor. Todd Brinley met him at the door. Mid-50s, firm handshake, polite. "Mr. Hollister, good to meet you. Come on in." They walked into the showroom. 2 new 8S Series tractors sat on display, gleaming red paint, 370 and 410 horsepower. Todd gestured toward a conference room. "Can I get you a coffee? Water?" "I'm fine," Jake said. They sat down. Todd opened a laptop. "So you mentioned you're looking to add a couple more tractors and possibly some hay equipment. Tell me what you're running now." Jake didn't pull out a notebook. Didn't need to. "I've got 2 7700 series, 2 6700 series, 2 5700 series, a 4200, and a 1085 from 1978. Todd's eyebrows went up slightly. "That's a solid fleet. All Massey?" "All Massey," Jake said. "That's great. We love to see brand loyalty. What kind of acreage are you covering?" 1,880 acres. Cattle and hay, plus custom baling for about 12 other operations. Todd leaned back in his chair, visibly impressed. "That's a serious operation. You've built something substantial." Jake didn't react. "I'm looking at adding a high-capacity baler and possibly a merger, and I need another tractor in the 200 horsepower range." Todd nodded, typing notes. "We can absolutely help with that. Let me pull up some options." He started clicking through inventory. Jake watched him. Then Jake asked the question. "Is Carl Ventura still here?" Todd's hands paused on the keyboard. He looked up. "Carl? Yeah, he's our used equipment manager. Why?" Jake didn't blink. "I'd like him to join this meeting." Todd's expression shifted, uncertain. Sure. Is there a specific reason?" Jake leaned back. "There is." Todd hesitated, then stood. "Let me grab him." Carl Ventura walked into the conference room 2 minutes later. He was older, grayer, heavier around the middle. He looked at Jake with polite confusion. No recognition. "Carl, this is Jake Hollister," Todd said. "He's looking at some equipment. I thought you might want to sit in." Carl nodded, shook Jake's hand. "Good to meet you." Jake didn't correct him. He just watched as Carl sat down across the table. Todd continued. "Jake's running 1,880 acres, 8 Massey tractors. He's looking to add more equipment." Carl's eyebrows lifted slightly. 8 tractors? That's a hell of a fleet. You must be doing well." Jake leaned back in his chair. "You don't remember me, do you?" Carl's smile faltered. "I'm sorry?" "March 2011. I came in with a 1978 Massey Ferguson 1085, wanted to trade it toward a 5400 series." Carl's face went blank. Then, slowly, something flickered in his eyes, a vague memory surfacing. "You told me you don't take scrap metal on trade," Jake said. "You said I was wasting your time." The room went silent. Todd looked at Carl. Carl looked at the table, his jaw tightened slightly. Jake continued, his voice calm but steady. "I left that day and decided I'd never buy a tractor from this dealership, and I haven't. I've bought 8 Massey Ferguson tractors in the past 8 years, spent over $340,000. Every dollar went to dealerships in Kansas, Iowa, South Dakota, and Colorado." He paused. "Not a single dollar came here." Carl's face had gone pale. Todd's jaw was tight. Jake stood up. "I didn't come here to buy equipment," he said. "I came here so you'd know exactly what your words cost this dealership." He looked directly at Carl. "That 1085 you called scrap metal? It still runs. It's sitting in my shed right now, and every time I walk past it, I think about what you said." Jake turned toward the door. Todd stood up quickly. "Mr. Hollister, wait, please." Jake stopped. Todd's voice was careful, almost desperate. "I can't speak to what happened 8 years ago. I wasn't here. But I can tell you that we've made mistakes, and we'd like a chance to earn your business." Jake turned back. "Why would I give you that chance?" Todd hesitated. Then he said something honest. "Because you're a businessman, and business is about results, not grudges. If we can prove we're worth your time, you'll know it, and if we can't, you'll walk away. But at least give us the opportunity to show you we're not the same dealership that disrespected you." Jake studied him. Todd wasn't Carl. Todd hadn't been there that day. And Todd was right about one thing. Business was about results. Jake looked at Carl. Carl still hadn't said a word. "I'm going to give you one opportunity," Jake said. Jake laid out the terms. "I need a high-capacity baler, a merger, and a 200-horsepower tractor. I'll give you 1 week to put together a proposal. If your pricing and terms beat what I can get from the dealership in Lincoln, I'll consider doing business here." Todd nodded immediately. "We'll get you a proposal by Monday." "Good," Jake said. He started toward the door. Then he stopped and looked back at Carl. "One more thing. That 1085 you said had no market value? I'm going to keep it for the rest of my life. And every time someone asks me why, I'm going to tell them this story." Carl's voice finally came. Quiet, strained. "I shouldn't have said that." Jake met his eyes. "No, you shouldn't have." And he left. The proposal came on Monday morning. It was aggressive. The baler pricing was $4,200 below Lincoln's quote. The merger was spec'd exactly to Jake's custom baling needs. And the tractor, a Massey Ferguson 6700 series with 380 hours, was priced $7,800 under market. The financing terms were 0% for 18 months. Todd had clearly gone to corporate and begged for approval. Jake read the proposal twice. He called his accountant. "Run the numbers against Lincoln's offer," he said. His accountant called back an hour later. "It's a better deal, substantially." Jake sat at his desk, staring at the proposal. This was the moment. He could walk away, stick to his principle, keep buying equipment 2 hours away out of pure spite. Or he could do what made financial sense. He called Todd. "I'll take the baler and the merger," he said. "But I'm buying the tractor from Lincoln. They've earned my business over the years. You haven't, not yet." Todd didn't argue. "Understood. We appreciate the opportunity. We'll get the paperwork started." Jake hung up. It wasn't forgiveness. It was calculated pragmatism. He'd proven his point. Now he'd see if they'd learned from it. Over the next 18 months, Jake bought 2 more pieces of equipment from Redstone. A mower conditioner in the fall of 2019, a 5700 series tractor in the spring of 2020. He didn't become their biggest customer, but he became a customer. And in a dealership that was fighting to stay profitable, that mattered. Carl Ventura left Redstone in late 2020. Early retirement, officially. But Jake heard through the grapevine that corporate had quietly pushed him out after years of declining used equipment sales and an internal review that flagged multiple customer complaints. Jake didn't celebrate, he just noted it. Todd Brindley, on the other hand, stayed. And every time Jake came in, Todd treated him with respect. Not because Jake demanded it, but because Todd understood what it had cost to lose him in the first place. In the summer of 2021, Jake invited Todd out to his operation. Todd drove out on a Thursday afternoon. Jake walked him through the equipment yard, showed him the fleet. 6 Massey Ferguson tractors lined up near the shop, 2 more in the field, the custom baling equipment, the hay merger, the mower conditioner. Todd was genuinely impressed. "This is a world-class operation," he said. Jake nodded. Then he said, "There's one more thing I want to show you." He walked Todd to the shed, and there it sat. The 1978 Massey Ferguson 1085, repainted, detailed, engine rebuilt, new glass, new decals, chrome gleaming, paint flawless. It looked like it had just rolled off the showroom floor in 1978. Todd stopped in his tracks. "You restored it?" Jake nodded. "Took me 2 winters, did all the work myself, every gasket, every seal, every bearing." Todd walked around it slowly, running his hand along the fender. "It's beautiful." Jake leaned against the shed wall. "Carl Ventura told me this tractor was scrap metal, that it had no value." He paused. "But value isn't about what someone else thinks. It's about what you're willing to prove." Todd looked at him. "You proved a lot more than that tractor's value." Jake shrugged. "Maybe. But I didn't do it for him. I did it for me." He looked at the 1085. "This tractor represents every hour I worked when I didn't think I'd make it. Every payment I scraped together. Every time I got told no and kept going anyway." He turned to Todd. "Carl didn't see that. He just saw an old tractor and a young guy he didn't think mattered." Todd nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," he said, "you matter now, and everyone at that dealership knows it." Jake smiled faintly. "I always did. Carl just wasn't paying attention." They stood there for a moment in silence. Then Todd asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if he'd just taken the trade that day?" Jake thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "I probably would have financed that 5400 series. Probably would have been a loyal Redstone customer for the next 20 years. He paused. "But I also wouldn't have learned to rebuild a tractor from the ground up. Wouldn't have built this operation on my own terms. Wouldn't have proven to myself what I was capable of." He looked at Todd. "So maybe Carl did me a favor." Todd smiled slightly. "That's a generous way to look at it." Jake shrugged. "It's the truth. Humiliation either breaks you or builds you. There's no middle ground." Jake Hollister never became the biggest Massey Ferguson operator in Nebraska, but by 2023, he was running 2,100 acres, 12 tractors, and a custom baling business that serviced over 20 operations. His fleet was worth over $1.2 million. About 30% of it had been purchased from Redstone Massey Ferguson. The other 70% came from dealerships that had earned his trust before Redstone ever got a second chance. The 1085 still sits in his shed, fully restored, fully functional. He starts it once a month, not because he needs to, but because it reminds him of something Carl Ventura never understood. A man who knows the value of what he has will always outlast a man who only knows how to sell. And in the world of dirt, cattle, and iron, that's the only currency that matters. Respect isn't given, it's earned, 1 horsepower at a time.